Good afternoon. Oh, good afternoon. All right, there we go. Welcome to INF5060. My name is Mike Adams. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for the Cloud Platform Business Unit at VMware. That's a fancy term for I work on vSphere and Friends products. This session is designed to be a high-level introduction into what's been happening with vSphere over the course of the last year. We talk about this at every VMworld, and so it's very important to give you kind of the updates of what's going on. And again, one of the design principles behind this is that there are many other breakout sessions that go into a lower level of detail. So if you see something here, based on the time that I have, I'm just trying to give you an introduction to that element, and then you can go to a different session to learn about that in a little bit more detail. In addition to that, what I like to do for questions is I will stay at the end, although I've got a very small amount of time. I will try to wrap up so that we can take some questions. I also have my card here as well if you'd like to take that, and then also my email address. Don't laugh, this is my true email address, madams@vmware.com, and you can send me a note at any time. Happy to interact, and if any of you need the presentation today, I could get that to you, for example, but yeah, most of you can just wait to the week for it to come out. But just on behalf of the engineers and all the folks that work on vSphere, we're just really excited about where the product is headed and wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing over some period of time. So the disclaimer is in here, and each of the slides actually says confidential, but nothing in this deck is confidential, so feel free to use the slides however you would like. There's no guidance around it, and I won't be hitting on any of the future pieces. I may make some comments about futures, but I won't be sharing any future roadmap detail. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to start out with a little bit of context, things that I think are always important for the vSphere admin, how your world is changing and what you should be aware of. We want to talk a little bit about the 6.0 recap and the adoption. How many people right now have adopted 6.0, vSphere 6.0? Okay. How many you think within the next 3 months would be adopting vSphere 6? Okay. How many people are really excited that U2's available, or U1's available, and they want to adopt it? Okay. How many people are running vSphere 4? Yeah, that was a joke. Okay. So good. All right. So let's go through there. Yeah, some people are saying, yes, that's not a joke. Yeah, we're actually running it. That's fine, too. Anyway, let's... We'll look at not only where vSphere 6.0 kind of hit the mark, but we'll hit some of the features. I'm really excited about Update 1 as well. We'll share some new features there. Also note that with the release of Update 1, some of the technologies are actually backported to 5.5 Update 3. So that is interesting from being able to adopt some technology without having to go to the next release of the platform. Want to share with you a couple of technology previews. So these will be more futuristic. You've seen one, actually you saw both today, the cloud native pieces with Kit and Ray a little bit earlier. Want to spend a little bit of time on that, and then also a little bit of time on the hybrid cloud piece, and specifically from vSphere, and how do we move from vSphere out to vCloud Air. The technology would actually work also with other cloud environments as well. We're just going to use vCloud Air as the key example because we think there's a unique tie-in there. In number 5, we'll talk about a few quick hits, some things like the host client fling and some few other components I want to make sure that you're aware of. I think that there's a very important pieces that we need to talk about. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about some of the additional technologies around vSphere and other technologies that have come out. I don't own some of these pieces, but it's important to understand what we've done with Virtual SAN, what we're doing with Site Recovery Manager, just so that you're aware of some of those characteristics as well. I'll share a few things around additional resources, specifically to upgrade to version 6, the webcast series we put together and have taped, so you can see that. And then we'll hit into the summary piece. And again, as I mentioned before, I do need to run to some press pieces after this, but I'm around the whole show, so I'd love to catch up with you afterward, and you can take a card or send me an email. All right, so let's get right into it. In talking about what we're doing, obviously you're seeing this picture a lot from us, this any application, any device, and one cloud. I think for the purposes of what the vSphere admin is doing, is remembering basically where are we going to go next, right? We have a lot of customers out there like yourselves that use just vSphere and you haven't leveraged any other pieces of technology. Well, to get to the full SDDC and what you're trying to do, you're going to need to look into those other pieces, right? So the operations management piece, for example, the new networking components from NSX, the ability to maybe leverage some of the hyper-converged pieces that you see toward the bottom. All these become very, very important. And I would tell you, one of my favorite things at all trade shows that I go to, people come up and say, "Hi, Mike, I use the VMware," or "I use VMware." And what they mean is they use vSphere. And they haven't really experienced some of the additional capabilities. So if you haven't experienced those, make sure to learn more about than just the core platform, some of the core areas that might help your business. Okay? And look at the hands-on labs and some of the other ways that we can go ahead and help you get to where you need to go. Right? It's not just about the core virtualization layer anymore. It's about how do we deliver all of these in order to support the applications that we have. And I think that that's a really key and important component. And as we go through as well, obviously the software-defined data center continues to be the approach that we're driving toward, right? So we all know the vSphere layer down here on the left. That has not changed, but the advent of NSX, virtual SAN, and then all the vRealize management that we have on top can provide a very sound infrastructure in addition to what I'm doing on top of vSphere. This picture has worked so well, and the innovations that we've done, we've actually created a version of vSphere that actually ties together ops management with the compute layer. We call it vSphere with operations management. Catchy title, right? But for those of you that are using vSphere, the practical application is, how do you today, at let's say 50 VMs and higher, how do you look at capacity? How do you look at performance and health of the system? And then how do you look at that overall planning over a set of time? Right? So the ability to have the ops capability tell you that in 41 days, you're going to run out of storage space. What happens when you run out of storage space in a VM? Doesn't work so well, right? So understanding how you can kind of go to the next step, I think that's very important as you think about where you're going to take vSphere, not just about additions that you're using and going from version to version. You need to think about some of these higher level constructs as well. So that's enough of that. But the other piece, too, is I think it's important is to kind of leverage out what we've been doing over time and where vSphere is kind of fitting into the mix. Okay? And this gets to what I was kind of talking about before. So many of you experiencing the core vSphere capabilities, and then, as I mentioned before, the new operations management piece that's allowing us to add that capacity and performance and health data on top. You have the other side of that coin, too, which is the larger vCloud suite, where if you're trying to set up from a higher level management and kind of delivering the overall private cloud, that would be the approach to go into, where it incorporates Enterprise Plus into that. And then there's some other pieces as well. You may not be familiar with Essentials Plus, generally for SMB customers, but one thing to be aware of for most larger vSphere customers is the advent of the new Robo capabilities. I talked about this last year, but since that time, we've had some tremendous uptake in people that want to use vSphere in the remote office and branch office scenario. Okay? So what we did for that is we actually took the features that you wanted, packaged it up in a per VM concept, and priced it a little bit more appropriately for the market. And so far, we've seen very good results there. So if you're thinking about areas to expand vSphere, obviously you have the operations management in the vCloud suite, and those have their own merits. But I think the Robo piece is something that a lot of you should go ahead and look after. So remote office, branch office, if you have those types of environments where you have pockets of vSphere, and our general research has shown about 2 to 5 VMs outside of the data center, that is something that you want to go ahead and look at. We're also up to 25% of running workloads now will be running in Robo space over the next 2 years. So that's pretty significant. But again, just remember that there's a lot more that we can add into a vSphere environment to get to some of these other benefits that we see on the left-hand side. All right, so that's enough of that. What about what we're trying to do with the core product? Right? We get asked a lot of times, is what's going on with core vSphere? Because you talk about it in the context of the suite or vSphere with operations management. What are you doing to kind of evolve the platform itself? So really kind of 3 areas that are significant for us. And we'll kind of look at these actually backwards, but still important to see what our head is, or where our head's at and what we're thinking. So number 1, cloud native applications, right? How do we go ahead and do 2 things? Number 1, how do we let you run containers with vSphere more efficiently than you do today? You can already run containers with vSphere, no problem. But as you saw with Kit's presentation today, you can't see much, right? You can't also optimize some of the operations around those. But we're going to do that. The other side to that is, can we also think about a newer platform that is not based off of some of the constructs that we may have known in the past or right now even? So we've introduced a new platform, the Photon platform, that will also help deal with cloud-native apps and specifically around the use case of using containerized applications and specifically Linux-based containers. The last piece is how do we continue to extend the lead that we have in virtualization, right? VMware, just at a core, is always innovating around what we're doing with the hypervisor, with ESXi, and also vCenter server. So how do we make sure we continue to optimize there and drive toward 100% of an environment being virtualized? Today, the latest stats that I'm seeing, our customers are virtualizing over 80% of their environment. How do we get them to that final end? And a lot of that has to do with virtualizing large-scale applications. One of the most sought-after ones now is things like SAP HANA, where we've introduced the larger VM sizes, the 128 vCPU and 4 terabyte RAM VM that was specifically made to better support an SAP HANA environment. But there are others that will come online too. All right, so these are really the kind of key things that are driving us along these different vectors, and very important things as we think about how we drive the product forward. So let's go through a couple of things with vSphere 6 and some things that you may not have realized. Here's the larger structure of the product, and as you think about vSphere 6, there were well over 650 new features and capabilities that we put into the product. Okay, you may say, wow, that's a lot. And yeah, it was a bookend or stake in the ground release where we said, okay, this is a major release and time for folks to move forward, right? We had done 5, we had done 5.1, we had done 5.5. What about the latest release? And in that 650, these are the really big items that came across. And let's start from left to right, and we'll work around here. So on scalability and performance, most elements for scale of vSphere went up by a factor of 2. So the size of the VM, both the CPU and memory, the size of clusters gone up from 32 to 64. Right? The size of the physical amount of RAM that you could have in a box, depending on the OEM that you use or the vendor you use, could go up to 12 terabytes, right? Those systems are starting to come online. So it's important that we recognize that every vSphere release, there's always going to be a scale component to it, particularly around some sizing element within the core infrastructure. The other piece too, around that 12 or 2 to 4x, is remember it also impacts other products that we're creating and using inside of VMware. So for example, moving from 32 hosts to 64 hosts in a cluster would allow you to go ahead and now expand virtual SAN to incorporate more disk inside of that environment, more disk and also more SSD. All right, also related to that, if you're a desktop fan, you use VDI, allowing us to go ahead and enhance the 2D and 3D graphics support through the use of the NVIDIA Grid technology with our vGPU components tied together. That is one of the last kind of use cases I think folks were looking at and saying, geez, I'm not doing enough here for 2D and 3D graphics from the desktop side. We can go ahead and enable that better with the vSphere 6 release. And then the final piece there, you see the rapid provisioning 10x faster with instant clone. So we did that also for the desktop use case. This newer technology, last year we called it Project Fargo. We've now productized it as Instant Clone. What it does for the desktop environment is it would allow us to create desktop VMs to the tune of, on the order of 64 desktop VMs in just under 5 seconds. So pretty fast in terms of deployment. We'll use Instant Clone for other technologies like big data and also in the container space. But this was very important that we brought this out for the VDI environment as well. All right, so that's enough on scale and performance. On the idea of availability, right? With 6, we brought out 2 features that are very important. One, vMotion, modified vMotion. Well, didn't bring it out, but modified it. Right? 3 different modifications to vMotion. vMotion over distance, vMotion across VCs, and vMotion across virtual switches. Okay? I would tell you that although long-distance vMotion looks cool and hip, and it's the neatest thing, I think for you guys as the admin, the VC to VC vMotion, I think is very more applicable to what you're doing. and then also the removing the network boundary piece and allowing you to move across extended layer 2 is important as well. So take a look at those pieces and see how they will work into your environment. In addition, besides vMotion enhancements to fault tolerance. So I was here when we brought out fault tolerance in 2009, and we said it's great, and it's great for VMs and zero downtime and all this stuff. And then we said it's for one vCPU VMs. And at that point, you guys went like this, right? People aren't using fault tolerance before the 6.0 version because it didn't support the larger VMs. And so now you can have up to 4 vCPU VM running in fault-tolerant mode. We think that should give us about 60 to 70% of the use cases out there, handle about 95% of the apps that are out there. And before you say anything about that 4 vCPU, yes, we have plans to go beyond it. I'm not going to share with you the time frame around that, but obviously 4 vCPUs is very important, and it's going to help us put more VMs into that fault-tolerant mode. You won't want to put every VM in fault-tolerant mode, and you want to put a lot in HA and some in FT, but it's nice to know that you can put larger VMs into that fault-tolerant capability. All right, so down the bottom, simplified management, right? What are we doing along that frame? Okay, so number 1, introduce something called Content Library. This is the technology we took from vCloud Director. How many people out there have multiple virtual centers? Okay, so this is for you folks. So, multiple virtual centers, what if I want to go ahead and share an ISO image or share a template? Not so easy to do, right? So what we would do in this context is you create one of the VCs is basically the repository for the templates and the ISO images. You can also put scripts and other things in there. And you go ahead and publish that to the other VCs. So I could go ahead and use the same template and the same ISO files across all the different VC environments that I have. So a little usability piece built in. In addition to that, everybody's favorite conversation, the web client. Yeah, see, so a couple people chuckled, I heard it. But the key around the web client is it is the only fully featured interface that we have for vSphere, right? We know the C# client does not do all the capabilities that the web client does, okay? And I will tell you, coming to you sooner rather than later, at some point we will go ahead and end of life the C# client, okay? That will happen, and it will happen sooner rather than later, okay? But in this case, the web client, we really went back to the drawing board and said, okay, how can we fix 2 problems with the web client, right? What are the 2 biggest problems with the web client, right? Everybody's going to shake their head on this, right? Number 1 problem, performance, right? Yep, okay, yep. And the number 2 problem, I call it the who moved my cheese, which is you move stuff around and I don't like it, right? It doesn't look like the C# client. Okay, so to solve both of those, this release, we went up by a factor of 5x at least on the web client performance. We realized there were things that we didn't need to pull. And just the way we are actually handling the information, we went back to the drawing board and have improved that. With the update 1, we've actually seen up to 10x improvements in terms of the speed of the web client. Don't just take my word for it. Go ahead and test it. Look at it in the labs. Look at it in your environment. You will see a noticeable improvement around that. The second piece around you move stuff around and I don't like it. We've made the web client look more like the C# client. So we've flattened some of the menus. You may remember that when you first started with the web client, you had a menu here, and then a menu, and a menu, and it kicked you to the side maybe 4 or 5 times. We've flattened those down. We've also done really simple things like taking the recent taskbar and put it in the bottom, right? That makes sense in terms of what you guys have seen and what you've been doing, okay? The other side of the web client is over time we will also be moving to a back-end HTML5 version of this. I'm going to share some comments around the host client, but we know that's important to you, and so we will do that as well. This is not HTML5-based web client, but you'll see the performance and that usability is definitely improved within 6.0. One other piece not mentioned under simplified management, and I think a lot of people miss. A lot of work went into the virtual appliance for vCenter, okay? vCenter virtual appliance, prior to this point, if you weighed it against the VC for Windows, there were 3 problems, right? Didn't support IPv6. Okay, well, maybe I got around that. Didn't support the number of VMs and number of hosts. That was a problem. And then the other piece is it didn't support linked mode, okay? We have fixed all 3 of those. So the appliance for vCenter does support IPv6 in addition to IPv4. It supports up to 10,000 running VMs, just like the vCenter for Windows. And also the linked mode, we don't have a dependency on Microsoft Atom any longer in the vSphere 6 version. We have a native function built in so that we can go ahead and create linked mode with the appliance. The appliance and the Windows setup for VC are functionally equivalent. But that's not enough. In the future, we want to go beyond that. So this is where we are today, but if you went in a roadmap session with me, I can share with you more detail around what we were going to go ahead and do. But just keep that in mind. And also, like the C# client, the days of the VC for Windows, they are coming over time toward an end. So be working with the appliance, think about the appliance, get used to the appliance as we think about where we go in the future. I think that's just an important consideration you should get into. All right, last piece, choice. Continuing to make sure that vSphere supports the latest and greatest technologies out there, pieces like containers. So in the February timeframe, we officially supported CoreOS as a guest operating system in order to better enable running containers. And then keep in mind, we also shipped in March the first version of integrated OpenStack, what we call VIO. So those of you who have Enterprise Plus licenses and you're interested in OpenStack, you can go ahead and use the full distribution that we have free of charge. You can buy optional support for that based on what you're doing. And then also, I'll share a little bit later, we came up with a 2.0 version of OpenStack, and that's also available now. It shipped at the end of Q3 this year. Okay, so let's keep on driving. So where are you with respect to your peers, right? What are peers doing about vSphere 6? So number one on the left, we wrote to all the beta customers and we said, when are you going to adopt vSphere 6? Okay, and you can see there that within a year's time, 91% of the beta customers said they would go ahead and adopt vSphere 6. And that's been pretty consistent. I'll share with you the overall numbers here in just a second. And then on the right, you can see, no great surprise, a lot of the feature enhancements, specifically things like vMotion, the web client improvements, those were key drivers for why people wanted to go to version 6. I will tell you that we have looked at the customer base. We've had over 30% of the customer base running at least one instance of vSphere 6, and they have adopted that in over a little less than 2 quarters when we took this stat. And we know that actually of that 30%, 20% of that is running vSphere 6 as their primary compute platform from VMware. We've had over 100,000 downloads thus far, so a lot of interest in it. And then also a very significant drop in the number of support requests. So I'm always measuring, anytime we bring out a vSphere version, I look at version 5, 5.1, 5.5, even back further. And this particular release has had significantly less support calls than any release we've ever put out there. Okay, and I'm talking on the order of 20 to 30%. And we did, I think, a really good job in terms of testing through beta, and this is one of the most stable releases I think we've ever had for the core platform. So just note to self, vSphere 6 is definitely a strong release, and moving toward that is going to be of your utmost benefit. Speaking of that, many of you usually wait till update 1 is available, right? This is kind of the effect of software, right? We wait till an update is available that fixes kind of some of the core bugs and some of the other capabilities within the product. And update 1 is definitely no exception to that. This shipped on September 10th, so it is available, and thus far we've seen a lot of good uptake of it in the last 4 weeks. So a couple of things that we're doing here. Number one, I have improved vCenter Server Appliance in very significant and meaningful ways. So a lot of what we call fit and finish work, where we have new capabilities for the backup of the appliance itself. I've done a little bit of work around the PSC, some other scale components, and just the upgradability, installation. All that becomes very much simplified. We've included some new scripts as well that are making that process just overall a lot more simplified than it's been in the past. So that's a really key aspect. Number two, around the web client. So obviously performance, I mentioned that, a 10x improvement in performance there, plus the update manager support. So for the first time, update manager will now be available through the web client. You won't need to go to the C# client for anything any longer, okay? So this was a really key piece. A lot of people said, I'm not going to get rid of the C# client and stop using it until VM or Update Manager is available. And now that day is here. Okay, so we have that done with Update 1. So keep that in mind, and that's pretty key for us as we think about what we're doing and how we're trying to drive at moving vSphere forward. Okay, faster evacuation times. So when you put vMotion in maintenance mode, we actually made some significant improvements from 5.5 to 6, and now from 6 to 6 Update 1, made some even better improvements, anywhere on the order of 5 to 7x. You should see better performance when you go ahead and put vMotion into that maintenance mode, or put the host more accurately into the maintenance mode. And then the last piece, certificate authority, had a lot of good impressions with that with vSphere 6. Many of you that are going to vSphere 6, the biggest thing that's architecturally different is the PSC, the Platform Services Controller. Get to know it, get to love it. It's how you do SSO and the certificate authority and certificate management. We've taken the certificate authority now with Update 1, and now instead of just using the command line, you can also do it through the UI. So that becomes much more simplified, and I think you'll be pretty happy with the overall way we're handling certificate management as we move forward. That was really a pain for a lot of customers prior to vSphere 6, and now this has been solved. And I think one of the other things I want you to come away with in this is that we're really focusing on the life cycle of vSphere, trying to make everything that happens in that list on the left, make it as easy as possible for you, and make this product not only good from new features, but also good from the features that you already know and the functions that are already in there. Right? So trying to solve some of the core things that have maybe held you back, or just kind of nitpicky pieces. Last piece that was also introduced with Update 1 is something we call vSphere APIs for I/O filters. This is based, with APIs we do a lot around storage. Right? We've done VASA for storage awareness. We've done VAII for array offload. There's a lot that have gone into our API program. This is another one in that list. So the APIs for offload for the I/O filter are allowing third-party services, probably most likely in the first releases, focused on server-side caching and also replication to leverage the I/O stream that's coming out of the VMs for these more advanced solutions. So these will be agnostic to the storage technologies that you're using, but they will really help drive performance, and then also some of these newer or some of the use cases that you see there around caching and replication will become significantly better. There is a session on this. I have it noted a little bit later, but there is a storage session around APIs for I/O filtering. So if you have questions about that, please go ahead and see that. As well as the Update 1 pieces I talked about before. There's a session around upgrading, and Salil and Madhup Galali and Salil Suri will go into each one of these in a little bit more detail because they have a lot more time than I do to drill down into each one. But when I look at it, there's never been a better time to upgrade to vSphere 6, right? This is a good time. You have Update 1 available. It's been through its paces, and so now being able to upgrade should be right kind of in your face, and you can go ahead and do that when you feel ready. But you can feel very confident that the product and platform is there. All right. Let's talk about a couple of the tech previews. So stuff that's going on, stuff that's coming up. Right? First around containers. Okay? So with containers for a while, there's been a couple of things that have been happening, right? You guys deal with developers, and I'm sure many of your developers are coming after you and saying, I want to use containers. And the reason that they're coming after you to want to support containers is they want the portability of the container. They want the lightweight aspect of the container. They want how fast it is to go ahead and enable the container, right? The advent of Docker has totally changed this because Linux containers have actually been around for a little while. What Docker did was made it much more simplified and then did things like the hub that are making it easy to share things, okay? Now, in doing this, it actually doesn't matter from a containers perspective. I think any developer that comes to you guys and asks you for infrastructure, you say to them, okay, I will give you that if we can go ahead and deliver security, we can deliver the right network components, we can deliver the right service levels, we can deliver the right management, and we have a level of persistence, right? So together, developers like this about containers, but any workload that you guys run, you want to make sure that you have these services. And so what VMware has done, even since back to VMworld last year, is basically we drop what I call breadcrumbs. We've been doing a lot of these small projects and some other things that, hey, they address these particular needs. right? We're doing a lot around supporting groups that are supporting containers and defining the aspects of what containers will be. We introduced Instant Clone. We introduced the Photon OS. So in April, we introduced a piece called Project Photon. That will now be called Photon OS moving forward. It's an open source version, a lightweight Linux operating system designed to support containers. Okay? In addition to that, you see a lot of pieces here. Many of these you're already familiar with. The only other one that you may not be familiar with is this one called Project Bonneville. So if you noticed Kit today, when he's talked about how we do containers today and how we would do it in the future, Project Bonneville was the secret sauce to how you do it in the future, right? Separating the host engine and the Linux OS from the VM and making the container and the VM one and the same. Okay, so Project Bonneville is the piece that goes ahead and does that, and that's an internal technology. But the basis behind this is you're doing all this cool stuff, but can you bring it all together? Can you bring it on home for me? Can you show me how you're going to be able to use these all together? And we think we can. Not only can we do that with vSphere, which will be the start, but also we can do this across the entire portfolio. So basically what I'm telling you is we're going to make containers first-class citizens like we do for VMs. Okay, so if you want to run containers, VMs, containers in the VMs, no problem, we can go ahead and do that. So here's the first piece to that, and the vSphere integrated containers, of which we've got many other sessions that are on that. In fact, one of our PMs is here, Aaron Blasius. He'll do a session later on about that, so you can talk to him later if you'd like to. He'll help answer questions at the end too. But here's what we're doing around integrated containers, right? You see the piece in the middle around vSphere. We'll incorporate that instant clone, that fast technology for deployment. We'll take the Project Bonneville, so the container is the VM is the container, and that Photon OS, and bring that out as an integrated containers infrastructure, okay? And the reason that you'll want to do this for many of you, this is going to be the fastest way for you to on-ramp into containers, right? If a developer comes to you today and says, I got to have containers, right? You're not going to go through a re-platform process most likely. You're going to want to try to test it or use it on the infrastructure that you have. No problem. We can go ahead and do that once we have the tech preview available. We'll talk about timing here in just a second. But basically, this does not force you to rebuild or re-architect anything. You'll be able to use the integrated container structure with vSphere, leverage all the capabilities that you know, DRS, vMotion, HA, any of the other functions, and it's going to be really key for you to have that integration point. And not only can you do that, but compatibility with existing developer tools and also the broadest ecosystem support out there. We've made sure that we are working with all those people out there. So, you know, Docker and Mesos and a number of the other players, CoreOS, Pivotal, all those folks are tied into, you know, making this very successful. Now, the other side of that is, and I actually really like this animation. So, you know, vSphere is a luxury car, but sometimes you don't need the luxury car, right? You need something that's way differentiated. You're not going to use the same thing. So maybe you're thinking about something like a turbine jet bike. And actually, these do exist. They actually have wheels, but there are motorbikes out there that do have jet engines that are attached to them that go very fast. My point here is that the traditional model of what you're doing with vSphere, it's not going to work for what you're trying to do, right? Because you've got different needs. You've got scale needs that are way different. You may want to run, you know, 10,000 containers or more. You may want to have API level access from both the developer and the infrastructure layer. So the developer says, okay, I just want to hit the APIs and request infrastructure, right? And then the last piece is, in this model, I don't necessarily need all the features that I needed when I had vSphere, right? The application itself knows how to clone itself, knows how to work around failures. So the need for things like vMotion or DRS, it's just not there. So it's a totally different way of thinking about it. This is a total different platform. It's not an extension to vSphere, it's a totally new platform. It uses some of the functions or some of the core components that we know from the vSphere layer. It's really based on having a different kind of scale out model, okay? So this is where we introduce the VMware Photon platform. The platform is made of two pieces, the Photon controller and the Photon machine. And overall in this platform, it addresses those needs we talked about. So deep APIs, API automation, you've got the scale, so supporting, you know, 10,000 running containers, and then also that just enough feature set, okay? In the controller, that's where the distributed control plane will live. as well as integration with Project Lightwave. That's our component for the access and security management within the environment. And then you also have the Photon machine, which is the Photon OS, the operating system, that lightweight Linux operating system, and then what we call the microvisor here. Really, that's just the ESX, optimized ESX capabilities with some other secret sauce built into it. But again, the idea here is that this is totally different for cloud-native applications. You need to go ahead and spin this up very quickly. Containers sometimes can go ahead and be very transient. They may not exist in a couple of seconds. So you need to have something that's able to support that speed and scale. So think about any work that you may be doing for SaaS, software as a service. This type of platform underneath would be a great way for delivering that software as a service, because it's looking after how do I deliver cloud-native applications in a different way. So thinking differently about the environment and helping you to redesign to think about some of these pieces. And I think one thing that's probably coming across your mind is it possible that I may be running both in my environment? Absolutely. So, you know, there are analyst firms out there that talks about two different types of IT, right? One that's running the legacy stuff and one that's running some of the newer stuff. No problem, you can do that. They will be side by side today. Here's a little bit more on the Photon platform architecture, just so you can see. So on the right here, I have my Photon controllers. You'll have some number there. Probably 5 is a little bit much, but you may have some number, 2, 3, maybe 4. And then you'll have some number of Photon machines here. And that's really where the scalability, the scale out really comes into play. You can have a lot of that scale, and then we go ahead and have the consumption layers on top. So if I want a Kubernetes package, or I want a CF package, or a Docker package, I can go ahead and do that, and I would go ahead and say, yep, here's where we go request the cluster that I want, the piece in the consumption layer, and then I go ahead and run that. This also brings in, and Aaron's talk talks about this, this brings in the concept of DevOps. So if you're driving more into DevOps, where people are coming together between the development and the operations model, this brings that conversation very clear into focus. So it's something to think about, because the different types of folks that may request these may be a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. So again, just something to be very aware of. This is a technology preview. Both of these have gone into beta already. If you're interested in that beta, we do have the ability to take a look at a sign-up application and see if you meet the criteria that we have for the beta. But we'll make both of these available in 2016. So again, when you compare them together, you're extending vSphere on this side to support containers and any other ops. And on this side, you're talking about the Photon platform, a completely new platform in order to support containers and deliver on some of those value propositions. You can also see a little bit different model in terms of probably how we'll bring it to market in a subscription model. And the last piece behind that, the Pivotal and Photon bundle, we did announce that as well. That will be a newer model for us to go ahead and deliver Pivotal CF, the world's leading PaaS capability on top of the Photon platform. So there's some definite key value props in doing that, the speed, the size, all of that. This is one of the great benefits of the overall federation that we have of companies behind us. We can deliver very important bundles like this, and this will definitely be the first of many bundles that we'll have around the Photon controller and how you bring things out. So my number one thing for all vSphere admins, get to understand containers and get to understand cloud-native applications, because I'm sure they will be coming at you faster than you think if they're not already there today. All right. That's enough of that. Let's go on to hybrid cloud, the other tech preview. And really, when we look at hybrid cloud, again, remember, I'm talking from the vSphere perspective out, right? How do we drive and link these two together? We see a lot of different use cases for why people want to do this, right? A lot tied into disaster recovery. Give me a secondary site where I can go ahead and fail over to, or at least store information. And on the bottom, tell me about dev and test, right? Can I go ahead and spin up another environment and bring things back should I need to go ahead and do this, okay? And then in the composite application space, we haven't seen as many folks do this, but more are starting to make that happen where they're running components of the application on either side, okay? We've also seen a lot of folks that are saying, for some of my infrastructure, I'd really rather just move it to the public cloud. I don't want to be in the infrastructure game anymore. I'd rather push a lot of it to the public cloud. And we're starting to see that in massive waves too with our customer base. But either way, the idea here is that there's a lot of technology kind of integration that we could do to help move data from that data center over here to the public cloud. Things that we're not really optimized for today. So let's look at a couple of these. I'm going to go by the benefit piece because I think it's more important to just look at the pieces of technology. You saw this with Yan Bing today. We were talking about the idea of cross-cloud vMotion. Okay, so moving from your SDDC, probably your private cloud, into that vCloud Air environment, we can go ahead and do that. Now with the benefits that we saw in vSphere 6, the across VC, the long distance, this gives us the ability to go ahead and do this and use vCloud Air as a target. The other component that comes into this as well is the advent of using the content library function across not only what you're doing on public cloud, but also what you're doing with your private cloud as well. So I can sync those templates, ISO files, not only between data centers, private cloud data centers, but also with vCloud Air. So this is, again, really extending out in terms of what we're doing. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of things that we could do to better enable you to connect to vCloud Air or any public cloud environment. So this, again, remember, it's very much in our thought process to leverage our technologies and think about how they're going to work in this model. So as a vSphere admin, I would be very, it's very likely that you'll see a lot of the technologies that you know today, we will extend them into working into this model. And that's a really key piece on driving forward and allowing you to extend to the public cloud. I think many of you, there's business pressure to say, how can we make ourselves more cloud or more cloud-like or be ready for the cloud? And the good spot with vSphere is I think you're in a really good spot to do that using some of these technologies. And again, this is a tech preview for right now, but we will include this most likely as we think about future versions of where we're going. Remember, tech previews can also change, so just keep that in mind as you think about these. All right. So we talked about vSphere 6. We talked about some of the tech previews. Let's talk about a couple of vSphere and Friends things, and then also a couple of things that I think are just really important. Number one, there was a release of Site Recovery Manager. Very often, one of the key use cases we see with vSphere customers is to use Site Recovery Manager for enhanced DR. If you're not using SRM today, again, it does workflow automation for DR, allows you to set up a test plan and also a full DR plan and help migrate to a secondary site and then back. And the key pieces here that I just wanted you to make note of were not only the, obviously the different changes we've made, but in this case, the use of vMotion for better use in the movement of your VMs. In fact, when you have vMotion there, the ability to have a replicated copy of the data helps that long-distance vMotion. So these two can work in combination together very effectively. You also see that the newer policy-based management, so the use of the protection groups within the storage policy-based management, that's what SPBM is, in those storage profiles, that becomes very helpful in terms of identifying what's going on and better automating how you integrate the storage and the storage that you use within the environment. So there are plenty of sessions that talk about Site Recovery Manager 6.1, so I won't get into that, but this did ship and it has good ties into vSphere as well as, as we move forward. Also on the virtual SAN side, I did mention this before, but the ability now to have, there we go, the support for SMPFT, so that's the larger scale fault tolerance of up to 4 vCPUs. That was pretty key, in addition to the fact that using this with some of the newer SSDs that are out there becomes very, very important. And I would just tell you that the virtual SAN, one of the most effective combinations with vSphere is now not just any type or dev test workloads, but any type of workload. Virtual SAN has added an all-flash mode that makes it very performant for the larger scale applications. So if you haven't looked at virtual SAN in a while, take another look because this latest release has definitely added additional capabilities like replication and support for stretch clustering as well. Last piece, this is actually run by our group, the VMware integrated OpenStack. So again, as many of you have investigated where you're headed with the cloud, a lot of people are looking at OpenStack for trying to drive down cost and also open up flexibility. No problem if you want to go ahead and do that. The key for me, though, is when you think about OpenStack like this, right? Think about OpenStack as a car, okay? And the car has 4,000 pieces. OpenStack today is basically a car with 4,000 pieces on the ground. And if you can figure out how to put them together and you know what you're doing, you can be very successful. we offer basically a car already put together. We can help you be successful around OpenStack by putting the OpenStack layers on top of not only the hypervisor, but some of the other technologies that we offer as well. So keep that in mind. This is a full OpenStack distribution. And again, as I said before, any of you with Enterprise Plus licensing, you have access to this full distribution. Okay? You don't have to pay for support. It's optional, and you can decide how you want to take this. The other piece that's important for this crowd in Europe, we've now introduced additional language support. So this product, when it came out in March, was English only. Now we have support for German, as well as I think the French support is also coming. But the additional support there, it is also localized and also internationalized. So working with the local OSs and the local devices is very important. We're working on some other programs to offer this with our vCloud Air partners, as well as some programs with folks like Rackspace and a few others in order to get this out into a broader market. We also do have a rollback capability, and it's easier to upgrade from VIO 1 into version 2. So just a quick note just around integrated OpenStack. If you're looking at OpenStack, definitely talk to us. We have the expertise, and we can help you down this path. All right, some quick hit things. Number one, flings. Okay, so two flings that I think are important, and they will help you as we think about where we're going in the future. Okay, so fling number one. This was released 3 to 4 weeks ago. It's the host client fling based off of HTML5. Okay, host client, what does that do? Right? If I were to lose VC and I needed to go into an individual client, I would use the host client to do that. Right? You can do that with the C# client. In this case, it's a good way to see what we're doing around HTML5, as well as just get a better methodology for connecting directly to the host. Okay? Eventually, we will productize that. What a fling is, it's just something we throw up on the web. It doesn't have official support, but in these cases, a lot of cases, we've actually tested pretty well, so you can be very confident in the capabilities that we have. In addition to that fling, one of the other ones that we also have is the migration in a 5.5 environment from VC Windows to VC Appliance, Linux Appliance, okay? So this actually gives you kind of what the scenario would be and how you would migrate from that Windows environment to the Appliance model, okay? So we're actually looking for folks to talk to more about those types of use cases. So if you're interested in that, definitely come up and talk to me, because we're thinking about how we make that process bigger than just a fling and get more detail around that. So definitely take a look at both of those. Flings gave us a great opportunity, outside of the release cycle, to kind of kick something out there and see what people think. And both of these have drawn a lot of interest. Number two, and these are just kind of a more random list of different things, but I wanted to make sure you understood. The VC Ops Foundation capabilities, there were some base foundation capabilities around brief analytics and some other pieces that we had in vSphere. In the vSphere 6 release, we've actually pulled that out. They didn't do very much, and they weren't in very high demand. People just weren't using them, so we went ahead and pulled those out. And then the last piece that's also very important is for that Robo environment. Not only did we go ahead and release a newer version of the Robo offering that came out that has some newer capabilities like FT, but we also, the storage team has released a 2-node version of Virtual SAN to support a Robo or remote office, branch office environment. So that means you would be able to run vSphere and vSAN in that configuration at a remote site. Remember, normally, Virtual SAN is 3 nodes. It's a 3-node minimum. In this case, there are some requirements and restrictions around that 2-node version, but we do have it. There are going to be a couple of sessions on that as well. So just some quick things to know and things to understand. And as I said before, make sure with both the client and also the vCenter Windows, make sure you're evaluating the newer technologies, because again, we are going to look to, most likely move away from some of the traditional C# pieces as well as VC for Windows in the future time frame. All right, so a couple of things. I know you guys deal with a lot of stuff, so I do this every year as well, just looking after the time frames around versions that you're on. And I know that many of you, just like we saw earlier, many of you run vSphere 4 and even earlier versions. But just keeping in mind the EOA, so when the end of availability is. And the way to look at this is you have what we call general availability, when that actually ends, when we stop giving it to you. The middle column is end of general support, so that's 5 years. when you can stop calling in, and then the technical guidance is the additional 2 years that we do basically documentation around different things that come up. And what I want you to see here is 2 very important points. So number 1, when we come and talk next year, we will be past the end of support for vSphere 5 and 5.1, or the ESXi 5 and 5.1. That's important. And then also remember, for those of you who are on 5.5, you remember this last year when I talked about this, the 5.5 version actually has a 5-year support piece built into it. What do I mean by that? Well, normally, if we bring out a dot version, the support clock is linked to the original version that came out. So in this case, if that were correct, the 5.5 version would be linked more closely to the 5.0 end of support. And you can see that's not the case in this particular chart. The reason that that's not the case is when 5.5 came out, we gave it a 5-year life cycle. Normally, if we were looking at this chart, it would have been a 3-year life cycle. We said, that's too short, so we gave you an additional 2 years on top of vSphere 5. Okay? So just keep that in mind, that in 5.5 you've got a longer window in order to go to 6 for whatever reason if you can't make that migration more quickly. Same thing on the vCenter server side. Again, same dynamic here. Next time when we talk, vCenter 5.0 and 5.1 will be end of life, and then you will go ahead and have that same additional clock on vCenter 5.5. So just keep these in mind. I realize you're not reading these every day. That's exactly why I put them into the chart, so you can see what's going on and what we're trying to do. All right, just some last pieces. Additional resources here. Definitely check out the booth. We put a lot of effort into putting all the vSphere components at the booth. The hands-on labs have everything related to vSphere 6 and some of the new technology previews as well. And then the last piece here, the storage I/O filters. You see the session there if you're interested in the storage I/O filters. And the last piece, very important, we put together a complete technology series on how to upgrade to vSphere 6 and everything you need to know on how to do the upgrade and what to expect. Okay, I've incorporated the URL in here. Please take the time to go ahead and look at this. It's also in the vSphere blog. So if you really look up the 6.0 upgrade series, you can get access to that. But a lot of very good technical detail on how to do the upgrade and what to expect when you see vSphere 6. So please take a look at that and leverage the technology and know-how that we have out there. Okay. Well, with that, I just wanted to remind you of the priorities that we have. Again, looking after the cloud native, brought out the tech previews around integrated containers, as well as the Photon platform, as well as VIO 2.0. Hybrid cloud technical previews around cross-cloud vMotion, content sync, and then some of the pieces that you see around virtualization leadership, the strong adoption we've had on version 6, as well as some of the other technologies that are now available in order to support that. So with that, I will go into Q&A, but I did want to remind you to fill out the surveys. I do read those every year, good, bad, ugly, whatever. Please go ahead and fill those out and let us know your feedback, because we always want to improve this. But I will stop for questions, but for those of you that do want to leave, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of VMworld 2015. Thank you very much.